Good evening, and a very warm welcome to all of you. Wherever you're joining us from, in central Arkansas, other places in the state, or in the country, or from around the world, thank you for being a part of our interfaith panel about the issues of inclusion faced by the LGBTQ community. My name is Sophia Said, and I'm the Executive Director of the Interfaith Center, your host for tonight's program. Along with me is Zach Hitzoy from the Stonewall Democrats, the co-sponsor of tonight's program. The Interfaith Center is a nonprofit organization with a mission to reduce the fear and hatred among world religions. And we do that by providing interfaith education. We do that by promoting interfaith dialogue and creating relationship building opportunities among people of different religions. We also provide programming for youth and young children, in fact, all age groups. And I invite you to learn more about our programs and our work by visiting our website at www.theinterfaithcenter.org. Zach?
Thank you, Sophia. On behalf of the Arkansas Stonewall Democrats, I want to say thank you to you and the Interfaith Center for making tonight a reality. At the beginning of the year, when we mapped out our monthly meeting topics, we wanted to do something around faith during the month of April. We had no idea at that time the way the last few months would go in Arkansas in terms of the Arkansas State Legislature. We believe tonight is so needed. So thank you to you and Britt, Scarda, our ally board member at Stonewall, for making tonight happen. Also, thank you to all of the faith leaders for being on the call tonight. The Arkansas Stonewall Democrats are here to help raise awareness about equality, promote policy, and elected officials who promote a pro-LGBTQI+ state. If you would like to join us, I will add our website and email in the chat. Again, Sophia, Britt, and Interfaith, thank you so much. We're looking for a truly uplifting discussion tonight.
Thank you so much, Zach. A little bit about our program tonight, but before that, to all the presenters and the moderators, please make sure that if there is YouTube or the link playing in the background, it's unmuted. Otherwise, we'll be hearing a strong echo the way we just heard with Zach. So what's going to happen next? I'm going to introduce Reverend Britt Scarda. I'm sorry, I was just checking if I'm on mute or not. And then he's the moderator for our tonight's panel. We will have 60 minutes of moderated discussion with our guest speakers, faith leaders, followed by 20 minutes of question and answers from all of you, our audience, our listeners. And as you listen to the panel, please use the live chat feature in the YouTube to let us know where you're joining us from, to post any comments, to share anything that you want to share, or questions that you might have from these faith leaders, from any one of them or all of them. Now, our moderator, Reverend Britt Alan Scarda, is an ordained elder in the Arkansas Conference of the United Methodist Church. Reverend Scarda recently retired from serving as the senior pastor of Pulaski Heights United Methodist Church in Little Rock from 2010 to 2020. He previously held the title of senior pastor of First United Methodist Church in Springdale, Arkansas. He has served as a member of 36-person delegation from the United Methodist Church in the US to the former Soviet Union and also to German Democratic Republic that was focused on disarmament, development, and peace. Reverend Britt Scarda is passionate about building bridges of peace and harmony, and much of his ministry is spent on advocating for peacemaking, bridge building, and advocating for social justice. It's also evident from the fact that Britt serves on the board of both these organizations, the Interfaith Center and the Stonewall Democrats, who are the sponsors of today's program. So Britt, join us on the screen, and thank you for moderating this very timely and important discussion, especially after the recent interactions within the Arkansas legislature that has been very devastating for our transgender community. So welcome to the panel, and take it away, friend.
Thank you, Sophia, and thank you, Zach, and thank you to the Interfaith Center and to the Stonewall Democrats for co-sponsoring this very timely event. There is a lot to cover in a short time, so let's get started by meeting first our distinguished panelists. First, Cantor Samuel B. Radwine is the spiritual leader of Congregation Etz Chaim of Bentonville. Sam will become an ordained rabbi on May 31st. That's next month. Prior to moving to Arkansas, Sam served as a cantor in New Jersey, Connecticut, and California. He has also served as an educator at Hebrew Union College in Los Angeles and a faculty member of both the rabbinical and cantorial schools for the Academy of Jewish Religion in California. Welcome, Sam. We're glad to have you. Lisa Raju Kessler has been a social worker for over 30 years, volunteering with individuals who are unsheltered or shelter insecure. Lisa also works and serves individuals incarcerated in the Arkansas State Prison System. Lisa began practicing Buddhism 10 years ago, and she completed the Apaya Zen Center chaplaincy program in 2021. She leads live meditations for the Ecumenical Buddhist Society. Welcome, Lisa. A native of Little Rock, Reverend David Freeman is a 1996 graduate of Centenary College in Louisiana. Following graduation, David served 4 years as the Director of Ministries to Youth and Families in his home church, First United Methodist Church of Little Rock, before matriculating to Candler School of Theology, Emory University, where he earned his master's degree in 2003. David currently serves as the senior pastor of First United Methodist Church in Little Rock. I was blessed to work alongside David from 2003 to 2010 at First United Methodist Church in Springdale, Arkansas. Welcome, David. Dr. Sarah Tarek, Professor of Internal Medicine and Associate Dean for Student Affairs at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. Sarah is also the co-founder and board member of the Medina Institute, one of the few openly inclusive mosques in the nation. Sarah serves on the board of Just Communities of Arkansas and the Interfaith Center of Arkansas. Sarah served also as the chair of the Inclusion Subcommittee for the transition team for the Mayor Frank Scott Jr. of Little Rock. Welcome, Sarah. And then finally, last but not least, Reverend Randy Eddie McCain serves as the senior pastor of the Open Door Community Church in Sherwood, Arkansas, a faith community he himself founded in January 1996. Happy 25th anniversary, Randy, to you and to Open Door. Open Door is a non-denominational Christian church which offers a message of reconciliation and bridge building between the Christian community and those who have felt alienated from the church. Randy's been involved in Christian drama and music for over 25 years and has traveled with his one-man productions of the life of St. Paul and the life of Christ. Welcome, Randy. Welcome to all of you. Welcome to our panelists, as well as to all of you who are joining us this evening. As Sophia already mentioned, let us know where you are joining from. We want to know where you are, and feel free to post comments and questions because we will be responding to your questions later in the program. The movement for LGBTQ plus rights in this nation is gaining widespread support among religious Americans of all sexual orientations and gender identities today. Growing numbers of people within every major religious group favor non-discrimination laws that protect LGBTQ plus persons. In fact, majorities in every major religious group, with the exception of white evangelical Protestants, support marriage equality. Two major news events over the past 2 years have notably amplified the number of pro-LGBTQ sentiments from the public with regard to the issue of faith and practice. One is the presidential candidacy of Mayor Pete Buttigieg, now our new United States Secretary of Transportation. Number two is the possible schism within the United Methodist Church, the largest of the mainline denominations, over recognition of full LGBTQ rights. There is no doubt at all that monumental strides have been made in terms of recognizing the deep and abiding commitments and contributions of the LGBTQ plus community to faith and practice. But we're still not there. To quote the poet Robert Frost, we have miles to go before we sleep. Miles to go before we sleep. So with this in mind, let's begin with our questions. Here's the first question for our panelists. What are the challenges the LGBTQ community has experienced in your particular faith tradition in recent years? And Sam, let's start with you.
Sure. Thank you. Synagogues have traditionally been family-oriented. In other words, families join synagogues when they want to educate their children, often leading up to they're becoming bar and bat mitzvah. We're actually striving to learn how to reach out to all kinds of households, single parent families, multi-faith families, people who question faith, seekers, as well as those in the LGBTQ community. It varies from denomination to denomination, but I think it's safe to say that all synagogues are looking for new ways to reach out to particular, and the LGBTQ community is certainly at the top of our focus.
Thank you, Sam. Lisa, how about you? How about the Buddhist tradition?
Sure. Well, thanks so much, Britt. Well, the short answer to the question is no challenges, but I elaborate on that just a little bit by saying that to me, one of the best explanations of Buddhism is a quote from the Dalai Lama when he said, when asked about Buddhism, he said, "Kindness is my religion." So Buddhism is open to all individuals and accepts people as they are. I decided in looking at some of these questions that it might be a good idea to reach out to some of the friends I have who would probably include themselves in the community of the LGBTQ plus. And one of my friends, I'd just like to quote what he sent back to me. He said, as one of several LGBTQ plus people who have served on the Ecumenical Buddhist Society board, I have never felt any resistance to my presence at EBS because I am a gay man. The center's members have been very welcoming to both of my partners. The same was true when I lived in Philadelphia when we visited the Tibetan Buddhist Center there. So I feel like it's a pretty safe statement to make to say that at least in Western Buddhism in the US, that we're just very open, and we certainly welcome anyone who would be interested in learning more about Buddhism.
Thank you, Lisa. Let's continue this question to ask. David, would you say a word about your mission?
Yes, and I'll try to do it quickly because we're talking about 40 years of pain and discussion in this. About 40 to 45 years ago, the United Methodist Church added some language into what's called our Book of Discipline, which is our doctrine and polity, our statement of that, making the claim that that the United Methodist Church states that homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. Now, the interesting thing is we've never defined what Christian teaching is, and it seems that this nebulous idea, it's not the teachings of Jesus, it's not the teachings of the Bible, it's just Christian teaching. And then with that language, I'll say we added two specific prohibitions. One is against the ordination of self-avowed practicing homosexuals. We cannot ordain people who are, again, an undefined term of self-avowed practicing that's never been clarified. And then the other is that same-gendered weddings cannot be performed on United Methodist property and by United Methodist clergy. over these 40, 45, almost 50 years of having this, there has been a lot of work to change that. There have been some of us who have worked to remove that language and remove those prohibitions, and then there have been some who want to strengthen that language and strengthen those prohibitions. The General Conference is a body that meets every 4 years. It is the governing body of the United Methodist Church for the world. They are the only ones who can declare official United Methodist polity and doctrine. And every 4 years since this, they have slogged it out over this issue, and the tensions have just increased more and more. And as any conflict happens in any institution or any organization, you get people who take sides in these issues, and you even get to a point where there is official organization of groups, subgroups that are trying to advocate for whatever position they take. This is built to a point where we find ourselves on the edge of schism. That was the word you used, Britt, was schism. Some people might just call it a separation, simply because of the way it's happening. We have spent the last 5 years, 6 years in intentional discernment of a way to create separation in a way that would be amicable. But we've discovered that unity is just not possible anymore, and that we were holding unity up as the ultimate goal, and what it was causing was more disunity within the body. So, as you said, there's been worldwide news about this. We thought we had come to a kind of a general agreement, and we thought we were moving forward on that. And in April of 2020, the General Conference was supposed to meet and vote on a proposal. And I don't know if y'all heard about this. This little thing happened called the global pandemic, and General Conference got canceled. And so they've not been able to hold that meeting. And so we are still stuck in limbo. And it's kind of, we're kind of at this place where we know what is probably going to happen, but we haven't gotten there yet. And then there's still these things that kind of bubble up among the negotiation of this. The interesting part about all of this, and then I'll be quiet, is all of this just smacks of institution and organization, not of a movement of God and the purpose of Christianity and United Methodism. And that is the difficult part. The last thing I'll add is just this separation that we're looking at is the more conservative branch that wants to retain this language would actually break off and create another denomination, and the United Methodist Church would remain intact, and then thus remove that language and those prohibitions, which personally, I am very happy that the United Methodist Church that nurtured me and that I'm a part of, and that have committed to, and the lens through which I see see my faith, is holding on to that and making these steps towards justice.
Thanks, David. And prayers as this journey continues, because it will continue for some time. On the same vein, but moving on a bit, more and more churches, synagogues, and mosques are becoming accepting of people, irrespective of gender and sexual orientation. So how is this experience unfolding and manifesting itself within your faith community? Zara, I know that you're part of one of the more progressive mosques in this nation. So could you address this?
Absolutely. Thank you all for having me. Again, it's a real pleasure and honor to be here and being part of these amazing human beings. I would say the change that is happening slowly. And there has been a definite need for change. How have we seen change manifest in the past 5 to 10 years? It sort of echoes a little bit of what David talked about, which is there is a growing movement of people, of American Muslims in particular, who are now noting that first of all, the majority of American Muslims now believe that LGBTQ people should be accepted in society. This is according to a Pew Research analysis. And then even a higher number of American Muslim women believe that. So I think there is a growing movement, right? There's more questioning. And I will be honest, homophobic interpretations are pervasive in the Islamic tradition and the stories. Islam is the youngest of all the religions represented here. And so I think we will, inshallah, continue to grow. I will say that in Arkansas, we are, as you said, Britt, in Arkansas and in the nation, we are very openly inclusive, and our language and our approach is very much in congruence with that. I would say though, how this is it's unfolding very slowly, and the reason why is an interesting phenomenon. The majority of Muslims in our community, I'll just talk about the Little Rock community. The majority of Muslims are immigrants, like my parents, from India, Pakistan, or the Middle East, where countries where there are still anti-LGBTQ laws, countries where still there are the culture is very much anti-LGBTQ, where LGBTQ people are still marginalized. So a lot of the immigrants come to this country not having met such people, and therefore not being able to humanize LGBTQ people. What's interesting is that as American Muslims like myself, who are born and raised in this country, growing up in such a pluralistic community, our experience is changing that. We do all know people who are LGBTQ. We have friends who are LGBTQ. They are humans and they are real to us. And so our goal at many mosques across the nation that you'll see is to have different conversations. You know, either Islam is for everybody or it's not. Either God is compassionate or God is not compassionate. And so if we're going to take the right stance, then we've got to change the way we're having conversations and let Allah be the judge, not us. So our primary role as humans is to exude that compassion and extend the justice, just like the Prophet Muhammad did, just like the Prophet Moses, just like Prophet Jesus. And so we know these leaders, these prophets in our lives never extended punishment or marginalized homosexuals at that time. And so we've got to change that. There are now mosques openly, many more openly inclusive mosques across the nation. There are exclusively LGBTQ mosques across the nation: San Francisco, Atlanta, Toronto, in New York. And so we're seeing more and more of a movement where there are unfortunately still mosques that are not LGBTQ inclusive. And so the community is saying, okay, well, we're just going to start our own mosques, and more power to them. But we want to be one of those mosques where our umbrella is wide. And so we want everybody.
Thank you. And it's so interesting to see the parallels between the three Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. I find that fascinating. Randy, let's turn to you and see, you are the pastor, the creator of an inclusive church. How is this experience unfolding and manifesting it within your faith community and your connection with the broader community?
Well, thank you, Britt. It's been a fascinating journey. When we started Open Door, it was because my husband Gary and we didn't have a place to worship, basically, as Christians. And we came out of an evangelical Christian background. And so I felt at the time I was fired from a position where I was associate pastor and minister of music because of mine and Gary's relationship. And I felt there needed to be a place where all people could come together. And when I sensed that calling, the calling came to me not as we need a gay church. It was, we need a church for all people, a grace place where all people that are followers of Jesus can come together and learn from one another and eat at the same table together, get to know one another. And that's where healing would begin, because it's been tough in the evangelical church world to be gay, LGBTQ. It has been very tough. And the faith has taught parents not to accept and love their children that God gave them as gifts that are LGBTQ, and put roadblocks in the way of parents just being parents and loving their kids. And it's done irreparable, sometimes damage to LGBTQ people sitting in the pews as they listen and hear themselves referred to as an abomination to God, and hear their parents sitting next to them say amen. That's been very difficult. So what we have found at Open Door, we've started in January of 1996, and we started in our home, 3 of us, and we are celebrating 25 years this year. We have seen people come there from all different walks of life. And it's been so fascinating to see people come in who are just tired of being in other evangelical church settings where they have to listen as their family member or their dear friend are called abominations and referred to as a political issue and not as a person. And so they have come and said, we don't have to put on our armor before we come into church. We know we're not going to be offended for our loved ones and our friends that are LGBTQ. So not only are LGBTQ people coming to Open Door, but we have other people that are saying, we want to be a part of a evangelical church that does not demonize LGBTQ people. I am a very progressive pastor, and so even to call myself evangelical anymore is a little scary to me. But I'm basically a follower of Jesus, and so much of what I feel about my faith walk is it's becoming, and I don't feel like I'm an expert when I teach from the pulpit. I'm just a fellow traveler, but it's been wonderful to see people coming together, to see a 65-year-old woman taking trans women shopping, and teaching makeup and different things. It's just been fascinating to see the journeys of people when you just take down all of that rhetoric and just get to love one another, which is what Jesus taught us in our Christian tradition. And, so much of what Jesus taught was about how we respond to one another, how we act, not what we believe and true, what beliefs we have, but how are we treating one another? And that's what we've seen, the beauty of just loving one another, regardless of sexual orientation.
Well, thank you. And having been a visitor in the past at Open Door Church, I love the fact that it's just church. It's not a gay church. It's not a straight. It's just the church. It's a community, and all are welcome and all are loved. But I so appreciate that. Do you, for all of the panelists, do you see a change or the need for a change in your congregation to become more accepting of the diversity within LGBT community? That might just be kind of a duh question, but it's an honest question. David, let me come back to you on that one.
Yes, absolutely. Our church has made great strides in the last 20, 25 years in becoming a place of hospitality to all. I can't say that we have a perfect track record or anything like that, and we still have a long way to go. I think that our current growing edge is becoming a place of safety and hospitality to trans people. Our congregation is very comfortable with the issue of sexuality. Now we are trying to get the same level of comfort with issues of transgender and people and becoming a place of hospitality for that. So that's where our growing edge is.
Thank you. Sam?
Sure. The answer to that really depends on the denomination of, as I referred to before, we are a multi-denominational people, just as the Christian community. And being an ordinee and affiliating with the traditions of the Reformed community, we were really one of the first seminaries to openly ordain openly LGBTQ rabbis and cantors, and principles that were set forth by our national organization, the Union for Reformed Judaism, has been very strong. But I think the issue of marginalization will always occur. We have sort of a unique situation in Northwest Arkansas. We are the youngest Jewish community in the state of Arkansas, as opposed to the River Valley, where communities go back to the 19th century. My synagogue was founded in 2004, and as a result of the business community that came to Northwest Arkansas for the first time. And most of our members are not from Northwest Arkansas, they're from other places. So it was a matter of finding each other first. That started to change as people have cycled in. Unfortunately, it's a transient situation. So we want to make sure that people know who we are, but we're still marginalized. I personally understand the marginalization. I grew up in a very small town in central Illinois that happened to be in Christian County. So as a result, I've always been part of a marginalized population.
Yes.
It's, as a business community, our congregation still has work to do in that area, in finding other people who are interested in us, possibly to choose Judaism as a faith, people who are coming from other or no religious traditions. So there's always work to be done, and we just have to figure out how to do it now.
Thank you. Keep up the good work. I can only imagine. Lisa, what about within the Buddhist community? Do you see the need for more change and acceptance?
Well, it's a good question because, my basic answer is sort of what I already said. We're very open to anyone who would like to come and practice with us. In fact, many individuals who come or came to our center before the pandemic and still practice with us online actually identify with another religion as their primary religion. We have members who are Jewish, who are Christian. Before the pandemic, when I was going out to the prisons at the maximum security unit, where we led a group a couple of times a month, the majority of the men who came to our group identified as Muslim. And so there were also individuals in that group who identified as gay men and who were willing to talk about that. But within our center itself, we do see a need for greater diversity. Again, not just in terms of LGBTQ, but just in general. We know that, and kind of something that Sarah had talked a little bit about, and that was, most of the Buddhists that, at least that I know and that come to our center, most of them practice more what we consider Western Buddhism, which is that the individuals who back in the 1960s and 1970s started following different Buddhist teachers. And that really kind of all occurred around the San Francisco area and grew into the rest of the country. But as a result of that, the Western Buddhism really across the country is more white, is more older. Within our particular center, I'd say the majority of us are over 50, we're white, and more women than men. So we recognize that, and we really have made, I've been on the board of directors, and we have made a lot of effort to reach out to get involved in the Black Lives Matter movement and show support to that, as well as different movements related to the Me Too movement, the LGBTQ events that have been going on. So we really want to reach out to everyone to know that if they have other belief systems, they don't have to leave that at the door. They can bring it in the center with us and practice with us and be part of our group.
Thank you. That's fascinating. Thank you for your work.
Sure.
I want to pose this to our panelists, but not only to our panelists, to all of those who are people of faith who are watching this right now. As people of faith, and perhaps even as leaders of faith, I want you to think about two of your identities. I want you to think for just a moment about your spiritual identity. And I want you to think about your sexual or gender identity. That's spiritual identity, sexual or gender identity. Are these identities separate from each other, or are they codependent with each other? Think about that for just a moment. Are these two identities separate, or are they codependent? And if they are codependent. Indeed, if they go together, our spiritual, our gender, our physical, then let's think about our LGBTQ plus friends and their relationship with God. How has the church or the synagogue or the mosque or other faith traditions caused damage in the past? Sarah, could you address this?
Sure. I will tell you that the Islamic world has caused damage to our LGBTQ sisters and brothers. In many ways, Islam traditionally, like many of the other monotheistic faiths, has defined marriage between a man and a woman. And that when you do that, you leave out a huge swath of people. Islam also states that one's faith is incomplete without marriage. Now you can still be a good Muslim or a good person and not be married, but your faith is heightened when you are married. It's complete. And that's based on the tradition of, in Islam, one of the basic fundamentals is that we are prohibited from having any sort of physical relations outside of the confines of marriage. And so that automatically excludes people who are LGBTQ, who because the Islamic tradition does not recognize LGBTQ marriages. And so that has caused damage. Where I see the positive changes taking place is interestingly related to transgender individuals. For me, one of the things that I love about my faith is that Islam and science have always gone hand in hand. Islam has never contradicted science in that way. And Islam, while Islam also maintains a traditional approach to gender roles, it does not to transgender identity. It's much more progressive and fluid in that way. In terms of its transgender citizens, our transgender Muslims. Pakistan, being very sort of having very conservative laws, has protections for its transgender citizens. Iran, the Ayatollah Khomeini, has allowed gender-affirming surgery in Iran. Al-Azhar University, the most prestigious Islamic university of the Sunni Islamic tradition in Cairo, endorses transgender-affirming surgery. So it's interesting to see how Islam is very slowly evolving, because the Islamic world at this point in many ways sees transgender individuals as this is how God made you. And therefore, even the most strictest interpretation of Islam will allow for gender affirming surgery, whereas Arkansas will not. We will talk about that. That's another story. So I think it's very interesting. In Islam, there's a concept called ijtihad, which basically means reason, right? It's the using of human reason and science, basing it on the text to derive rules that address emerging issues of the world. And I'm hopeful that several aspects of the Islamic world has moved forward in the past 5 to 10 years in terms of its transgender individuals and protecting transgender people. Now we just have to continue that conversation for our lesbian and gay citizens and brothers and sisters in faith. So I think it's very interesting seeing how the positive, still very, very challenged. I still very much hurt for my LGBTQ sisters in faith who still feel marginalized every single day. That rhetoric is still very much alive in many corners of the Islamic world, whereas I'm at least heartened by some of the changes that are happening.
It sounds very heartening especially in terms of the transgender community. Thank you. Randy, I feel like you have been on the battlefront. What could you say to us about this issue? How has the church, the institution, caused damage in the past?
I think for me, it was important for myself to be whole. There's this wholeness which is holy, and coming from the conservative evangelical Christian background that I came from, being a gay man, coming into the understanding of that, I felt split down the middle. I felt like I either could be a follower of Jesus or I could be gay. I could not be both, and that does such damage to a person because all of my life I really had this hunger to know God and just know more about God, and was drawn to that. And yet I felt like when I realized I was gay, I thought, oh, now I can't be Christian. I can't be in ministry. And I remember when I fell in love with my husband, and at the same time, we had attended a recreation of the life of Christ. And as we were watching it, and I felt all of a sudden my spirituality and my sexuality coming together as one, and the wholeness that that brought to me was so healing and so beautiful. And it changed everything for me. And I realized I can be gay and I can own my spirituality. And it made my life just blossom. And that's what my hope is for so many others, whatever faith they are coming from, is that they can be able to practice that faith and know that they are loved by God and can come together and have that wholeness. That's the damage that's been done by all of that. That's the damage. That's the damage that is at the front door of many of the evangelical churches that I know of. And so it's been a beautiful experience, and I've never been more whole.
Thank you. And your imagery is so beautiful. It's such a hopeful and beautiful kind of image for who and what we can be. And that brings me to the question, what are the positive changes currently taking place today, either in your tradition or that you see elsewhere? Lisa?
Well, I see us reaching out to all individuals, as I said before, a more diverse group. I also see us just as a community. We have these laws that are being passed in Arkansas, but I really don't believe that that is what the majority of Arkansans truly support. I think some things get blown out of proportion. I think that often people act out of fear because they are misinformed about different situations. And I really believe the majority of people will embrace others no matter what. And you see that more when you see people relating one-on-one with each other. That's a very sad thing about the pandemic, is that we don't get to just stand on the corner and talk to our neighbor as much as we used to, or stop people in the grocery store and have conversations. One of the things that really strikes me, though, is when I hear someone, and it's almost reminiscent of hearing my father or my grandfather talk, who were very, very conservative people. It's like, yeah, but when you really get to know that person, you're no longer just seeing them as this sort of image that's out there that you have all these misconceptions about. You really get to know the person and you realize you're not really that much different. I love some of the things that Randy had to say. And that is that, just show up, just go to the church, see what's going on, see that, we all came from similar backgrounds. Many of us grew up in, very religious, traditional religious churches where we were told what we could and couldn't do. But just reach out there and get to know your neighbors and get to know the people that are different from you. And you'll see a whole new world. And I just want to say one more thing, and that is that, I think a lot of what we're seeing just comes out of fear, and it's fear of the unknown. And the antidote for fear is love. And so we just need to embrace each other with love.
Thank you. The antidote for fear is love. What a great statement. We could wrap this whole panel discussion around that one statement alone. David, what positive changes are currently taking place that you see?
Well, specifically in United Methodism, I see there's a lot of positive in people working to really change the kind of well, not kind of, definitely oppressive practices and prohibitions that we have in our denomination. So there is a lot of energy towards that. But I think in general, I see a growing sense of empathy. I think that empathy is that great antidote. It's the thing that leads us to love and to love our neighbor as ourselves. It allows us to see from a different perspective. And when you talk about issues of sexuality, empathy is almost, I don't want to say easier, because I don't want to make this sound like it's just easy, but you are related to someone who is gay. You are related to someone who identifies as LGBTQ plus. You have those connections in more ways, and so you are exposed to it more, and it can increase one's capacity for empathy a little easier. And so I see that happening. I see even there's people who would identify as staunchly evangelical Protestants, staunchly conservatives, very a very tight box view of sexuality. I see them looking at family members and saying, "Oh, but I love them," and then from there they can expand to say, "Oh, well, then I can love all in that way." And so I do think empathy is a big part of that, and that's the most hopeful thing I see.
Thank you, Sam. Because of your you've traveled, you've been around the country, you have served in various places. How would you respond to what positive changes have you seen, and do you see them in your part of the world today?
Well, I'll start with when I first came to my community in Bentonville as a member, and they started to talk to me about religious leadership. We had a wonderful conversation, and I learned a lot about Walmart and J.B. Hunt and the folks that work there. And the synagogue that was striving for a Jewish presence in a place that does not have a visible Jewish community. And after a lovely conversation, I said, "All right, folks, we need to address the elephant in the room here. You're about to enter into a relationship for a religious leader with a man who's married to another man. We need to talk about what that means here." And a woman looked at me and she kind of giggled. She said, "Sam, you don't understand. At the Walmart home office, when there's a meeting of the LGBTQ affinity group, they usually have to go to a hotel because there's not a room large enough to accommodate them in the hotel." And I kind of let out a sigh of relief on one hand. On the other hand, as you said, miles to go before we sleep. I resonated that. There's still a lot of work to be done. I'm hopeful because people are speaking out. In the Jewish community in particular, we have been burdened by a history of gender hierarchy and discrimination. And I think once that changed, once certainly Reform Judaism and conservative Judaism became egalitarian, and there were places for men and women, and God was not referred to by gender-specific language, all of a sudden it opened up a lot more possibilities for people to identify with a spiritual center and with this idea. I teach in the seminary with an overwhelmingly female student body. So I think that makes a difference. It's not specific to the LGBTQ community, but I think once one realizes that the male hierarchical structure of old traditional Judaism does not exist in our community, it automatically becomes a more welcoming place, which is what we hope to happen.
Thank you. Thank you. Excellent. And wow, with regard to the Walmart story, that's a real wow. I am the moderator, and because I'm the moderator, I'm the keeper of time. And there's several questions I really want to get through. So as we go through these, just try to be concise as you answer, and maybe we can stretch it out. But I really, there's some things I want us to get to that I think people will want to hear. Freedom of religion is a fundamental human right here in the United States of America. As a result, this has attracted wildly diverse faith traditions to this land from all over the world. Furthermore, freedom of religion in America has led to a kind of avant-garde approach to faith, oftentimes permitting people to uphold and practice religious or moral beliefs that lead to discrimination against various segments of our population. And this would include, of course, the LGBTQ plus community. What do you say to someone, here's the question, what do you say to someone who refuses their professional services to LGBTQ individuals under the assertion that they are upholding their own religious or moral beliefs? It may be the proverbial baker not baking a cake for a same-gender couple, or a priest not performing wedding services for a same-gender couple, or a physician withholding medical assistance to a member of, say, the transgender community. What do you say to someone who does this, who refuses professional services? Sarah?
I will try to keep it brief because I'm going to get on my soapbox and I'm going to try not
Okay.
to. Your freedom of religion has to stop when others' freedom to purchase and live and exist as an American citizen is affected. End of story. When we start bringing in freedom of religion into everything that we do, then it's a slippery slope that will never ever end. Number one, that's what got us here now, where our legislators feel that as a doctor they can limit how I practice medicine if I want to take care of a transgender 17-year-old. Without understanding the ramifications. So yes, America was founded on freedoms, but it is now to the point where people's freedom of religion is invading other people's right to exist. And that's problematic. That smells of the Taliban to me. And I find it extremely abhorrent when I see this kind of behavior. It's really very, very dangerous for our country. And then I'll go back to the fundamentals. Again, if you follow Jesus Christ, if you follow the Prophet Muhammad, if you follow the teachings of Prophet Moses, did they ever ostracize, deny, or call out? No, they didn't. Show me something. Show me a story. Did they ever unjustly punish? No. Did they ever punish? Not that I know of. So I will go back to the fundamentals. I think that is really problematic. It's going to harm our society. And your religion, my religion, cannot harm anybody else. That's like me saying I don't drink alcohol. It is part of my faith to abstain from alcohol, and therefore I will not treat an alcoholic patient. It's ridiculous. It's that level of ridiculousness.
And those are the fundamentals. Thank you so much. I was reminded of a theologian and mystic, Howard Thurman, who once said that common ground can be established between two different people if and only if my freedom does not infringe on your ability to be free. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. That's the gist, 100%.
Randy, would you address this too?
I think it's interesting. So much of what the evangelical churches, the Christian churches that I've been involved with, have talked about is right beliefs instead of right actions. And so much of the Beatitudes, which was Jesus' teaching, was never about right beliefs, but it was about right action and how we treat one another. When you say love one another, Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. I think it's more than just love that neighbor as much as I love myself. It's love that neighbor as though that neighbor is myself. Mm-hmm. And so there is that connection between us. And so with my, as a Christian, if I am with a Muslim friend, you know, they are a part of me, a cell in the same human family. And so it's about actions, and it's about loving one another. It's about giving food when somebody is hungry, giving a drink when somebody's thirsty. We as a church tried to help some charities that are Christian in our community here in Little Rock. And when they found out what church we were, they told us we couldn't help feed the homeless because they didn't agree with our stance on sexuality. And I said to the director of this, I said, what about the story Jesus told of the Good Samaritan? I mean, to those listeners, the Samaritan was someone who was helping, even though they didn't consider them a good person because of their nationality or whatever. They didn't consider them good, but Jesus referred to them as the good person that helped in a situation. It wasn't about their beliefs or where they worship. It was about doing the good to the other and all others. And so that's what I would like to say. And if somebody is sick and you won't treat them because they're gay and you call yourself a Christian, I want you to go back and listen to Jesus' words when he said, I was thirsty, I was in the hospital, I was sick, and you came and visited me. What are you going to do with those statements as a Christian? It's not so much about belief when you get right down to it. It's about what we do to love one another.
Thank you. Right actions, right actions. Let me move on here. And this is really in the same vein. Recent actions within the Arkansas legislature, as well as other legislatures around the nation, have been especially devastating for the transgender community. As people of faith, how can we help educate the masses regarding transgender issues while also offering love and support for the trans community? Sam?
So I'm going to give a shout out to Governor Hutchinson, who I probably wouldn't have voted for. But when he went to speak to physicians and families and medical professionals and came to his veto, which ultimately did no good, but he came to it out of an educated place. I think that's the model. The model is that we as religious leaders have to do the same thing. We have to help educate not only our flock, but we have to speak out in the public, in the marketplace, because that's the only way this absurd political maneuvering, which is what it is, it's not a decision based on sound medicine or family practice. It's the only way that it's going to be counteracted. And I pray that I get some help in doing that, because it seems like an insurmountable task in the state right now.
It does, absolutely. Lisa, how about you?
Yeah, well, one of the basic Buddhist beliefs is that of non-duality, which basically means that we don't see ourselves separate from each other, from nature, or from the rest of the world. Everything we do impacts everyone else, and the suffering eventually just comes back to us. Unfortunately, when we do see ourselves as separate beings, this separateness is very threatening to us. And I really feel like that's where a lot of this comes from, is that, as I said earlier, when there are things, there are people that we don't understand because they seem to be different from us, or at least we're noticing the differences more than the similarities, we feel threatened by that. And again, just really getting to know other people. And I kind of see that I feel like all religions, I mean, we all basically come down to one basic belief. We say it in a lot of different ways, but having grown up in a Christian church, I'll say it that way, and that is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And if we could just keep that in mind and not act from fear, not feel threatened, but educate ourselves and really understand where other people come from. And of course, you know, we can take action, and I like the term right action, because that's one of the paths on the Eightfold Paths, which is one of the Buddhist primary teachings. But in a non-violent manner, we can go out and we can very publicly show our support for people who are being harmed through this legislation.
Thank you. We are running tight on time, but I'm going to jump back to Sarah on this one for obvious reasons.
Sure. You know, I think that, as others have already mentioned, education is really the key. And Sam, I'm with you. I have to admit, I'm disheartened right now. It seems so overwhelming to me. I think physicians, I'm hoping more and more physicians continue to speak out. Um, Even though a lot of that did not end up helping very much. I agree with you that I'm grateful for the governor's wisdom that he listened and he heard people's stories. And I think it is so easy to dehumanize people when you don't know them. And I think that's part of the issue here. I think we've got to work harder to share the stories. I can share the evidence. You know, I can scream forever that we know that when we are unable to treat transgender youth with hormone replacement therapy or gender affirming surgery, whatever that is, obviously with their parents' consent, it causes harm if we are not able to do that. And you know, the Quran teaches us, and I think the Jewish tradition, this is very evident as well, that God says, if you save one life, it is as if you have saved all of humanity. And if you take one life, it is as if you have taken all of humanity. If you've murdered all of humanity. So I think for me, that's what drives me, is this fear that now that we have this law in place, and I pray that something happens and we're able to overturn that in the courts, that we know from data when these such basic human rights are denied of healthcare, that people die. The week when all of this came out in Arkansas, emergency rooms across our state saw an increase in attempted suicides amongst our transgender youth. That's a fact. And so, you know, God teaches us that saving human life is the most precious thing ever. And so I'm hoping that our legislators are educated. I'm hoping that we can change people's minds or do something differently to get people to understand this. So I think education and human stories are really, really important.
Absolutely. Thank you. And if we could just all follow the Atticus fence principle and in the other person's shoes, we would understand. It would change the world. It would change the world. I want to hear from all of you on this last question. And we don't have much time, but I think it may be the most important question of all. For members of the LGBTQ plus community who have been ostracized and shunned by organized religious groups, what word of hope and what word of help can you offer today? If you would keep that brief, what word of hope and what word of help could you offer to that community, to the LGBTQ plus community today? Randy?
What I would say as a word of hope is, in my own life, what I have experienced as a gay man. And I was told that God would not go with me when I was ostracized to the forbidden zone. But when I was cast out, that's where I found my Savior, my Jesus, outside in the forbidden zone. And so just because your faith community may reject you, that doesn't mean God rejects you. And there is hope that you can find. It's not about knowing so much and going to all of the classes to be a good Christian or whatever. It is an experience of knowing that you are loved. And God is love. And if God is love, that love is unconditional. And you are loved as an LGBTQ person. You are loved by your Creator. And that you can find even in the forbidden zone.
Wow. Thank you, Randy. Thank you. David?
I think the hope I would offer is that God is much greater than any religious institution. And there is an expression of the divine that is not held by religion. There is an experience of the divine that is uniquely yours. So for all the limitations of our language and our faith, my understanding of God is that God is loving and present no matter what. And what Randy just said, unconditional. God isn't loving. God isn't like love. God is love. And this is what we Christians call grace. And grace is both unearned and unwavering and unconditional. And so that is where my hope lies in everything. And that is the hope that I would offer anyone struggling.
Before I go to the next person, we really don't have many questions. So if you are watching and want to send your question in, please feel free to do so now as we're continuing through this time together. I want to ask Lisa too about what word of hope and what word of help can you offer today?
Well, as I said, discriminating practices are rooted in fear, and fear can be overcome by embracing love. And so we need to continue. The way we can help is to speak up, to educate, and not be afraid, to stand by each other, not turn our back on people who need us. In terms of hope, hope always exists. Hope is inside of us all the time, no matter what else is going on with us. And in Buddhism, we have a slightly different sort of twist on how we talk about that. And we like to talk about our Buddha nature. And my belief, and the belief I think of many Buddhists, is that we are all born as a Buddha or as enlightened individual. And that stays in us throughout our entire life, but we just get layers and layers of life, piles on top of that, to where sometimes we can't find that Buddha nature or enlightened one inside of us. And so what we do is, through our practice, we just keep peeling off those layers like layers of onions until we come back to our true Buddha nature.
Thank you. Thank you. Sam?
The phrase that you put out there, organized religion, it seems like that for so many decades has somehow been a target for people to shoot at and say, well, I don't go for organized religions because there's this large generalization, which kind of puts the burden on us. You each on this panel, including myself, we each have traditions that are open and affirming and welcoming. Our job, and I think our challenge, is to be what's been described as audaciously hospitable in finding the ways to get the message out there of this sort of negative idea of an organized religion. Yes, there are organized faith communities that believe in goodness, believe in God being a loving God of everybody, that there are people where you belong. And now we just have to go out and get them in a very positive way.
Thanks, Sam. And then Sarah, help and hope.
This is something that I will never forget as long as I live. Every time Muslims have done something bad in this country, every time there's been a terrorist attack, California, 9/11, I will say that the LGBTQ community has always come forth to defend us. And when the Pulse nightclub was attacked by that young man who was also of Muslim faith, I thought, all right, it's over. The LGBT community, they're going to be done with us. They're not going to defend us. But what actually happened was the reverse. That once again, when people took to attacking Muslims and Islam, it was the LGBTQ community, the community that was attacked themselves by a Muslim man who stood up and said, no, 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 no. These are not all Muslims. Please do not insult Muslims. This is not the Muslim faith. And I remember seeing that, and I cried that day because the community could have demonized us. They had the right to in that moment. They were in so much pain, but they didn't. They saw us as humans. They saw us. And I will never forget that. And American Muslims across this country, people who I talked to, saw the same thing. And so the LGBT community needs to know that yes, not all Muslims in this country see you as, you know, our equals. They see you, they may see you as sinners, but there's a lot of us who don't, and we will always stand up for you, always.
The remarkable Christian writer C.S. Lewis, in his book The Great Divorce, describes hell as people continuing to argue with each other, and they keep moving further apart until they're living 100 miles from each other, and they end up being totally isolated. And I think you've just given an example of how important it is that we hold together in all things. With that in mind, I do have some questions that I would like to lift up, a couple of questions at any rate. You haven't sent one in, feel free to go ahead and do that now. Here's the question. How can we challenge the rigidity of the Quran, or actually any other scripture, on LGBTQ plus issues? So it comes back to, I guess, the authoritative writings of any of our traditions. How can we deal with that on LGBTQ issues? Randy, I'm going to come back to you.
That would be a long response, and so
Keep it short.
yeah, I am just off the top of my head. I have in the past, I have pointed to the fact that so many times scriptures have been taken out of context. Also, you have to understand the culture of the time that those scriptures were written. And also, you can look at other things. I've said there are no true fundamentalists, only selective fundamentalists, because there's other areas of those scriptures where people are not fundamental on those scriptures, and point out that they too have rejected, because they have experienced a human need, that scripture seems to not apply to them. And so I would just throw all of that out. And once again, I just go back, and this is what helped me, because for a while I didn't know if I wanted to even read the scriptures for a while, because they were used against me as clobbers, to clobber me. And but when I went back to the scriptures, I realized that I took all of that into consideration, and I realized there was a lot more about love, that God is love, for me.
Thank you. Lisa, would you like to address that?
Well, I think the point about whatever religious text we may be referring to understand the society at that time. Now, with Buddhism, there was very little discussion well, first of all, there's lots and lots and lots of Buddhist texts. We don't have like just one book that we reference. But there's not a lot of information that really references sexuality, aside from that monks and nuns during the Buddhist time were expected to be celibate. But another area that I think there's some similarities in that I know a bit more about, and that is the role of women in Buddhism. And of course, this is true throughout history. I recently wrote my thesis on the feminist perspective on Buddhism. And so it's very interesting when you look back at what was going on within that culture, within that society at the time that certain texts were written, and the fact that what the individual in it, such as the Buddha, was doing was very profound and different, and may actually have not tried to go too far out of the societal beliefs at the time, because they were trying to spread their particular beliefs and did not want to be ostracized. So keeping that in mind as we start to interpret certain texts, nothing about the Buddhist teachings were even written down until about 500 years after he lived. and it was passed down orally. And when it was finally written down on palm leaves or something like that, literally, it was not even written down in the Buddha's original language. So we really need to consider all those things as we look at these particular issues and consider how the basic teachings apply to the world that we live in now.
Absolutely. And so I think what I'm hearing is context is so important. It's vital. Sam, what are we going to do with the Hebrew scriptures?
We're going to read them over and over again because the rabbis say to us, the Torah is a living document. And from the earliest days of the rabbinic tradition, the rabbis said, you'll live by the Torah, you'll not die by it. And what they meant that to me is you're going to read scripture in the context by which you need to read it. Now, the details are, of course, in, as I've made reference to, denominations and how we read scripture. We all read it and we understand it as everybody else is referred to in context of time, but it becomes the basis for the life of our people. And Torah, our first 5 books, Torah demands life. It says you'll live by these laws. So because life is most important, we will make sure that it means life for all people and all people who want to come and celebrate in a Jewish context.
Thank you. Shifting gears, I have another question here. Someone wrote this question, said, I heard a religion stream earlier, and they were talking about getting gay people to change their sexuality, which I believe, unless you're, what about this issue of just saying, let's just change your sexuality, and the issue and combining that with faith issues? How can we address that with the broader community? David?
Yeah, in a lot of Christian circles, it's this praying the gay away, and it goes back to the harm that I believe Randy spoke of earlier. It is doing direct harm to people, and it's a denying of the image of God that lives in each person, to say that there is a portion of you that is an abomination, whatever derogatory term is used, is a denial of the divine image that lives in everybody, the Imago Dei. And so I think it's just absolutely harmful, and I don't even think it's possible. But I think it also goes back to that question that you posed about inviting us to look through 2 different lenses, the lens of our sexuality and the lens of our spirituality, and I think of those as lenses of they're not just they're ways we look upon the world, and they're a part of who we are at our core. And I don't think you can say, okay, I'm going to look through this lens one day and this lens the next day. You look through both of them at the same time. And to ask people to split those off is where you get that bifurcation of spirit. That your spirituality is directly tied to your sexuality, and your sexuality is directly tied to your spirituality, and to pull those apart through some sort of pseudo Christianity, pseudo prayer, is just harmful, and that is an abomination to God. It is to me using God's name in vain. It is using God's name for evil.
Yes, thank you. Sarah, could you add anything to what David said?
Sure. I'll reference, the tenets of Islam are based on the Quran, which we believe is the absolute direct revelation from God to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and has not changed since 600 AD plus, right? It hasn't changed. Not one word has changed, and we believe that to be the word of God. The second is the stories and sayings and actions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, through hadith. And so I'll just reference a hadith, which is a Sahih Muslim hadith. It's one that's been passed down and legitimized by multiple scholars. And it's a story in general about, and I think the story emphasizes the reframing that David is talking about as well, which is a Muslim man came to the Prophet Muhammad admitting, and I said, having sexual relations outside of marriage is a big sin for us in Islam. And so he comes to the Prophet and says, I have committed adultery. The Prophet Muhammad then turns away from him, turns his back to him. And the man circles around and comes in front of the Prophet again and says, Prophet Muhammad, I have committed adultery. I've committed sin. The Prophet Muhammad turns away again. And that man is not going to give up. And he circles back in front of the Prophet. This happens 4 times, right? And he, again, is testifying. This man is testifying against his own self. And the Prophet says, are you mad? And he says, no. And the Prophet says, are you married? And he says, yes. And then the Prophet says, okay, fine, and decrees whatever he decrees. The point is that in the time, as God is sharing this information, these revelations are happening actively. We see the leader of our faith not wanting to get into people's business, not wanting to cast sin on anybody, not wanting to ostracize, not wanting to judge. But yet, here we are in a world where everybody's rushing to do that. And that is a central hadith in our tradition. And so I would tell anybody who's trying to change somebody or worrying what they're doing in their bedroom, that I would share the story of the Prophet. That's our tradition.
Thank you. Wonderful story. I didn't know that story. That's wonderful. Yeah, that's amazing. Lisa mentioned earlier that most religions, all virtually, share this idea of the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I submit that the tragic flaw of all of our traditions is that it doesn't matter what you are. We all cherry pick our sacred writings and we use them the way we want to use them. And we forget about the divine during the course of doing that. I have a comment here that came from Deborah Mitchell. Thank you, Deborah. But she simply made the comment, we are more than a political issue. We are human beings. We're more than a political issue. We are human beings. And by human beings, that means we're part of the divine. Could any of you say anything about the current political climate and the pain associated with that and where we might go from here? Should I just call on you? Sam?
Thanks. It's been forgotten. It's been forgotten by those decision makers that we are, in Judaism, we say we are made b'tselem Elohim, we're made in the image of God. What happens in the political arena doesn't seem to have any semblance or respect for that idea. We're the ones that have to hold that idea out, we and our communities. It's the only answer. It's the only answer. And I thank you for sort of zeroing in on that.
Thank you. Would anyone else want to address that statement? We're not political, we are human beings. Anyone? David, I see you raising your hand.
Randy had his hand up too, and I don't want to.
Oh, I'll catch Randy too.
Oh, I'd like to address it not in the context of like the political realm of the government, but the politics of particular denomination and this schism that we're going through, because that is something that gets brought up a lot in this conversation in United Methodism. Is there are people kind of that want to stay in the middle and say, well, why does this have to be the breaking point? Why does this have to be the issue that breaks us apart? And I keep coming back to, this is not an issue. We're talking about real people and real harm done against real people. And to what Sam just said, we've forgotten that. We've forgotten this this divine image that lives in those people, and we aren't able to empathize with the pain that they're experiencing, the real pain in that. And so we want to push to the side this idea that, oh, it's just an issue, it's just it's an idea, not, these are people, these are real, actual things that are happening. So
Thank you. Randy, do you have a response?
Well, yeah, I mean, I know what it feels like to be treated like an issue, a political issue. I remember when gay marriage was an issue in Arkansas, and some political people were running ads that said, "This is not us in Arkansas. We don't believe this way. This is not a true Arkansan that believes this way." And I'm thinking, what about me? You know, and I went the ex-gay route. I tried that. I tried all of that. And I know what damage it did to my spirit, because I did not choose to be gay. This is who I am. And to deny that part of me, I almost drew in with me another person, a woman, and almost ruined her life, because I was trying to do what the church was telling me to do by change and be heterosexual instead of gay. And I know what pain. Finally, I got to the point where I decided I'd rather be hated for who I am than loved for who I am not. And I couldn't play that game anymore. It didn't work. There's no one that's ever tried to pray it away any more than I did. It didn't work. And I never had peace until I accepted who I am.
Wow. Thank you. What a way to end this time. And our time is up. And so thank you. Wonderful, wonderful panel. I appreciate you giving your time on behalf of the Stonewall Democrats and the Interfaith Center. It's been a blessing to be with you tonight. Thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. We invite you to spread the word by sharing the YouTube link for this video. Also, if you would like to know more, check out the Facebook pages for both the Interfaith Center and the Stonewall Democrats. Also, explore the many programs offered through the Interfaith Center for people of all ages by going to our website at www.theinterfaithcenter.org. Thank you for being with us. And now I invite you to receive this blessing. May the God who created a world of diversity and vibrancy go with us as we embrace life in all its fullness. May the one who teaches us to care for the stranger and foreigners go with us as we seek to be good neighbors in our communities. May the Spirit who breaks down our barriers and celebrates community go with us as we find the courage to create a place of welcome for all. Amen and amen. Thank you.